I'm Jim Turr, the producer of the video you're about to see. It was made almost 25 years ago in the year 2000, and it's basically unchanged here, except that I've made a few color corrections and added a few captions about things that I think should have been made clearer in the original video, especially for younger viewers. I want to emphasize, in case I didn't strongly enough in the original video, that this is not the only Holocaust that has occurred in history. It's not the only mass persecution and murder that's happened to almost every people, including probably your people. My intent in doing this video, besides trying to empathize somewhat with what these people went through, was to understand the process by which it came about. The stirring up of feelings of grievance, scapegoating, fear, misinformation, and stereotyping that allowed these horrors to happen. It's called demagoguery, and it's been my life's study and concern. And I have no hesitation in asking you to watch with that in mind. How could such atrocities come about? Because we've lost several democracies in the past century, including the past few years. So it's worth thinking about how it happens so we can all become more conscious and more wary of this spiraling into chaos. How do some people get other people so divided and polarized? Finally, in the notes below, you'll find links to other videos that explore these questions further, including one by me called Why I Take Racism Personally. Thank you very much for watching.
Das ist keine Großmacht und
In the 1930s and 1940s, German Chancellor Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party conducted a reign of terror throughout Europe, igniting World War II, which resulted in the loss of perhaps 30 million lives worldwide. Many Europeans under Nazi rule turned a blind eye and in many cases lent a helping hand, while Hitler's executioners murdered an estimated 12 million men, women, and children, including 6 million Jews, in a catastrophe now called the Holocaust. Although such genocides have happened throughout history, this one was made more chilling by the fact that it was methodically carried out in a modern, supposedly civilized society. Sadly, some admirers of Hitler, who share his philosophy and his hatred, conduct a sophisticated campaign today to convince others that the Holocaust never happened. But in spite of the pain of telling their story again, many witnesses to the Holocaust, including some who actually survived the concentration camps, are willing to talk about what happened, to help ensure that such a nightmare will never happen again, anywhere. In a downtown plaza in Albuquerque, New Mexico, hundreds of people of all faiths gather to dedicate a memorial to the millions who died in the Holocaust. In a quiet garden across town, a smaller monument also honors the memory of those who were killed. Several of the city's residents spoke to us about the events of 1933 to 1945.
This is my son Charles. He got killed in Vietnam. He was the only child we had. This is my husband and I. He was in World War II. When Hitler came to power, I was 7 years old. I was aware of it right away. My mother was Jewish, my father was Catholic. My father lost his business because of my mother being Jewish. I think we had to leave in the middle of the night. And it was hard. I was 16 when they arrested me, but in the meantime, they arrested my mother, all her family. In 1942, all my mother's family was on a train, the death train they called it. When they got to their destination, wherever it was, like it wasn't right in Auschwitz, it was somewhere else. We never found out. They were all dead. They gassed the whole train. Then they arrested my mother on Christmas Eve, 1942. Walked her all through town. They marched her, the Gestapo marched her all through Frankfurt and beat her every inch of the way. She was in Auschwitz 3 days when they killed her. This is the wedding ring belonged to my mother. They sent it back after they killed my mother in Auschwitz, sent it back to my father. They arrested me the 14th of April, 1943. I was in prison in Frankfurt until December 1943. And when the Gestapo arrested me, the commissar said, a blonde, blue-eyed Jew. And I said, yes, and I'm proud of it. And at one time there were like 95 women in one large room, sleeping on straw sacks. And every Monday they would ship them off to Auschwitz, and every Monday I was ready to go. And I didn't. They saved me because of my father being Catholic. And my dad didn't know where I was. And I walked past him down the steps, and he didn't even know me. That's how I weighed 65 pounds. When I was in prison, we had a police lady that helped some older women. She helped them, and they took her to Auschwitz and killed her. So they didn't care who they killed. And no German was allowed to help a Jew, and if they did, that was the end of it. My brother and I wore the Star of David from 1942 in September, and I wore it till the war was over, 1945. You had to wear it on your left side above your heart. It was shaped like a star. It was yellow and had black Jew in the middle. And you were not allowed outside your house without it. My brother always wanted to go to Israel, because he never made it. He never came home. He got killed in Bergen-Belsen. People got sick and died and starved to death. That's all there was. And he was only 18 years old, so it's hard. When I went to Bergen-Belsen last year, all I found was my brother's name in a book and 4 mass graves. And I could not go to Auschwitz to see where my mother was killed. I couldn't go because she wasn't, when my father found out, when she got to Auschwitz, the next day or two, they gave her a bar of soap and told her to take a shower. And instead of water, the gas came out, and in that shower room, the trap door opened, and down in the ovens they all went. So that I couldn't go to. I defy anybody to look at me and tell me it didn't happen. It did happen, and they knew it happened. It can happen here, it can happen anywhere, and it has happened here. No town or city is immune to it. Those maniacs are everywhere, and it's up to all the kids that are growing up now to see that it doesn't happen again. I tell you, here I am, almost 73 years old. If one ever crossed my path with the wrong look or word, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably spend the rest of my life in prison, but I would feel good enough that I've done away with one. You can't kill 6 million people and think it never happened. I mean, that's almost as big as New York City.
What did we see? We had a few minutes to spare, and we wandered into the camp a little bit. And right around the corner was the end of the railroad line, and there was a couple of open boxcars with bodies half in, half out, some on the ground. People who, for some reason, don't know, they say, oh, it never happened. Well, you tell that to these 300,000 Army men who went through these camps from one camp to another across Germany and on into the Russian area. And they'll tell you that it happened.
The Holocaust was a catastrophe. It was an absolute, total catastrophe. And sometimes we're asking people to relive, to rethink, to talk about again the most horrific moments of their lives. And it's not just that we can understand they wouldn't want to talk about that, but many of them also have lived active, full, joyful lives since then. And sometimes the survivors I know, and I know a fair number of them, want to be known as something more than just survivors.
In a desperate flight to escape the Holocaust, Joe and Madeline Kessner crisscrossed Europe, North Africa, and the Atlantic Ocean to Canada, with Joe even working for a time as a spy for the British government. Here's just a small part of their story.
May the 10th, 1940, Germans invaded Holland, Belgium, and France. And 3 days after, that was on a Friday, and 3 days after that, on a Monday, May the 13th, 1940, I came home and I told my family, let's get the hell out of here. And we did. We took a train.
It was very bad. We didn't have any water, we didn't have any toilet. We couldn't wash ourselves for 4 days and 4 nights. I couldn't wash the baby. Then the Red Cross came sometimes and they give you a bit of food. I didn't know what to feed them, and people were fighting for food already then. You know, we got 1 loaf for 20 people, so it had no toilet, it had nothing, and if you had to go under the train, or you had to go in a can behind the blankets. The men was easier, you know.
We didn't want to be burned in the gas chamber. That's why we escaped. Most people didn't know what was going on. We knew. We had family. Some of my family was there. Crystal night, the night that they broke all the glasses, the windows and everything. The synagogues, the shops, they broke everything that was belonged to the Jewish people. And we had, on the road, when we were off, we met so many people that had escaped. My father-in-law died in Auschwitz. I found out later on that all my family was killed in Auschwitz and in Sobibor. My brother, not. He's missing. He was shot by the Germans in Antwerp. After I left, all this happened. My family and everybody was taken by the Germans. My brother was shot in Antwerp. They never found his body. I have a big book here full of names of people, 500,000 Dutchmen that have been murdered. I had a feeling to leave. I have to tell you this. I had premonitions, feeling of do this. That's the same when we left Antwerp to go to France. This time it was a feeling of, let's get the hell out of Oran. The day after we left, all the foreigners in Oran were picked up by the French, Vichy people, of course, Gestapo behind them. On August 15, my oldest son died. First of all, he was undernourished. We didn't have much food. And he got caught malaria, paludismo. So he died, and he's buried right there in Tangiers. I started working for the British Intelligence Service. But my wife played a very interesting role there. In Tangiers, the secretary of the German embassy, he was in love with my wife, which was okay. And he drank a lot, and she got out of him exactly what I needed to know. She was always on the background, but always there. We were always together. There was another guy, Jules Tayen. He had run away from the Foreign Legion. You should have seen how they looked like. They had escaped from Tetuan, and they also went to Gibraltar. You should have heard what they told. The murders they were seeing, the torture that was going on in those camps. Well, 19 of us, they were betrayed. Somebody betrayed us, and we were caught, sent into a camp near Tunis. I've forgotten what the name of the camp is. But there were 4 of us left. A Frenchman, a Czech, an Englishman, myself. And I have a God-given gift for languages. I spoke Arabic. And what happened was that one day, it was during the Ramadan, we killed the guard and got away because the thing was on a hill, and that was about 12 o'clock when the train came past, and that when a train has to make a turning around a hill, it slows down, and that's when we jumped into a freight car. I was smuggled out of Tangiers to Gibraltar. There were people that denied the fact that there was a Holocaust. They are either ignorant or they don't want to know the truth. I have met some of these people that denied the fact that, or they would say that blamed the Jews for everything that was wrong. And they said, oh, this is exaggerated. Well, 6 million Jews were murdered. 6 million other people, gypsies, Poles, Russians, you name it, Dutch, Christians, were murdered. 12 million in total. How can they deny these things? Look what happened in Kosovo. Look what happened in Russia. Look what happened all over the world. So, I mean, these people should be taught, first of all, what was going on.
No, I think it's terrible. The people never happened. I think they are dumb because they should know better. And I think the parents, if they don't teach them, they never will know.
So we never had a dull moment in our lives.
How can we comprehend a figure of 6 million men, women, and children murdered by execution, starvation, disease, torture, and by being worked to death in slave labor? To help visualize so much humanity, here's a crowd of an estimated 17,000 men, women, and children enjoying a basketball game. Each square represents one such group of 17,000 people as we expand outward to total approximately 6 million.
You have to understand that to do something like this meant, if you were lucky, you would be arrested and deported to a slave labor camp. But normally it meant that you and your family would be shot. I saw many people put up against the wall and shot for this very thing, for hiding and transporting Jews or other people. So my father took the risk his own life, my mother's life, and the lives of all 7 children in our family. My question to you this afternoon is, how many of us would risk his life, her life, and the lives of all the people in your family for the sake of another person whom you don't know, have never seen, and will never see again? So why is it your father did this? Because many of your friends were Jewish, or because you feel close to the Jewish people? And the answer is really neither. Because these were human beings who were about to be killed. And my dad reacted as a human being to the plight of another human being.
I was born June 26, 1938 in Berlin, Germany. And it was but a few months after my birth that the Crystal Night occurred. And my grandfather, my father's father, was living with us at the time, was pretty dismayed by what was happening, and in fact killed himself on the second night of Crystal Night in my parents' apartment, because he felt he was keeping them from being able to take care of themselves for the future. Germany had, shall we say, stripped the Jews of everything they had. My father was already without work by then and went into forced labor in late 1939. That was the only way you had any work in order to secure the stamps you needed to buy food in Germany. There was no other way. And your stamps were marked Jew, of course. Tearing down bombed buildings that had to be dismantled to make them safe for the public. Jews had to do that without being allowed to wear gloves, so that you would suffer the punishment of the cuts you would get from handling, you know, raw brick and cement and all these sorts of things. You were not allowed to protect yourself. And I was eventually sent to a Jewish kindergarten because our life had already been so narrowed down by then. The plan really was for Jews to be isolated, starvation. So it's isolation, starvation, and annihilation. That was really the 3-phase plan. We were already isolated, living in a house for Jews only. And in 1943, finally had to go into hiding in the attic of that building, where an elderly couple who had owned the building and clandestinely still owned the building. In the attic, we were able to stay for about 4 or 5 weeks, I'm not sure. But the portier, as it's called in German, I don't know what that is called in English, it's sort of a building maintenance person who was actually sent there to spy on people and was rewarded for spying. The Gestapo finally was led to the attic hiding place by the portier, who had noticed new plaster where old should have been, and they broke in. And they wanted to know our last name. They weren't even looking for us, as it turned out. And we couldn't say our Jewish name, Goldstein. So one of the Gestapo people hauled off and smacked my father in the face. And I was terrified because they had revolvers. They asked him repeatedly what his name was, and I couldn't understand why he wouldn't tell them. And they had prearranged, if they ever broke into the place, that he, my mother, and I would be able to make a run for it. He locked them, the Gestapo, who had gone running after the other couple in the second little tiny room, who had created a diversion, a pretend escape, We went down and my father grabbed me, held me, and walked across the post office courtyard. And my father kept saying, walk slowly, slowly, put me down. And I walked between them. I remember the not stepping on the lines that every child does. I didn't understand it, but the trucks on the street in front of the building were loaded up with Jews that had already been rounded up in the general neighborhood. The trucks were going to deport people, first take them to a holding center within Berlin, and then from there, as we learned later, the majority went to Auschwitz direct, and in some cases to other camps, and then into the system of annihilation. No one called out our name, which would have been a dead giveaway. Goldstein is as Jewish as it gets. We jumped onto a streetcar without money, without a suitcase, without anything but what we had on, and that began our underground life. I remember we walked into a cigar store. This was a person who had been a customer of his, a non-Jew, of course. Jews had no business. And he said, you can stay one night, but that's all I can risk, because the penalty was one as good as it was for Jews, be sent to a camp for having harbored a Jew. So we stayed. I remember I had a terrible cough, had that in the attic already, to the point where my parents used to put me into a separate attic alone in case somebody heard me cough and found me, and didn't want to give away the 4 adult people if I was caught. So I went to a woman doctor. The woman doctor, I believe, had a child that had died, and her husband was in the service. And she said, I'll take this child if I can baptize her. No heathen over my doorsteps. So, okay, baptize. So I have a reservation in several heavens by now. And I prayed the only little prayer I knew, which was a simple little Jewish thing, Hebrew thing. And she immediately rang up the people who had brought me there and said, get that child out of here. It prays in some gibberish words that I can't understand. Well, so we got along, my parents got along, but I never really saw them but for 5 or 10 minutes. I didn't really know what had happened to them. I didn't know I was a Jew. I didn't know what a Jew was. And one day, my mother reappeared there on the front steps. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. But I really wasn't interested in her anymore. So much had happened that I was kind of catatonic in my behavior. Just kind of numb. Well, my father was pretty good during the time they were still together at faking his way through. He would go into some place and say, hey, I'm a soldier on furlough and I'm here with my girlfriend and we'd like a room. There were no men walking around who were not in uniform in 1943. And that is precisely what cost him. He was arrested eventually in the middle of a street. And my mother, who had been coached not to give away what was happening, that she was related to him or anything, heard him say, well, I live at, named off some fake address, which to her meant, you stay away from here and from this situation. That was the last time she saw him. My father had told my mother, if he ever landed in such a place, that he and what they had vaguely heard were true, then he would go to the electric fence. They had heard these people were kept penned up in an electric fence system, so they couldn't leave and escape. But the conditions were nothing like what a civilized mind could imagine. Nothing. No one really survived any of this except my mother and me. We'd say, okay, let's play Abholen, and I'll be the Gestapo, and you be the people that we're going to pick up. In Auschwitz, people played that. Children played insane games like that. Reality becomes the game that you play. I mean, my world was so upside down that all rights were wrongs, you have to realize, and our wrongs were right. Criminality ruled. If you had a straight person and a straight mind and an honest character, there was no place for you. She sat me on her lap and said, I want you to know why all this is happening. And of course my answer was, all what? I thought, this is life. This is life. This is how it works. People often ask, well, weren't you scared? Scared of what? Isn't this how all life is? You just presume it's like this. I had no clue. I had no clue. I didn't even know when my birthday was. I was 10 years old. Probably one of the heap of bodies. My mother used to be afraid if she looked at documentaries, she'd find one of our family there in the heap, though I've assured her we wouldn't recognize any of them. People didn't even recognize each other.
Larry Ray left Germany for the United States in 1935 at age 18. In 1945, as a young soldier in the United States Army, he found himself at the crossroads of history. Hitler and his mistress had committed suicide, but other major Nazi war criminals were being tried in Nuremberg, Germany, and Larry Ray was there.
I was sitting right behind that little table when this witness said the final solution was applied to more than 5 million Jews.
In the course of the trial, he became acquainted with Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, who gave Mr. Ray the photographs you see here.
Well, Hoffmann worked directly under me while I was there doing the Nuremberg trials. And we became, I wouldn't say intimate friends, but we became pretty friendly with each other. He gave me the pictures. I don't know whether, I guess he took a personal liking to me.
It's obvious that much of our information actually comes from records and documents that we accumulated, documents about the perpetrators of the Holocaust. The danger, of course, is that the perpetrators' record, which in large part, for instance, comes through testimony from trials and so forth, is that a perpetrator obviously is likely to tell his side of the story, which isn't always necessarily the truth. Especially if you're in a court of law, you're facing prison terms, executions, clearly you tell a story that is rather self-serving. And so I think it is very important for the study of the Holocaust, for better understanding, that when we talk about sources about the Holocaust, that we also know about the side of the victims. And it is, I think, very important, therefore, that people who have survived the Holocaust tell us their story. A story that is obviously very painful. Not everyone can tell it, but I think subsequent generations will not only be grateful, but terribly appreciative that we have that side of the story.
The Polish people had freedom to do what they wanted to attack us from everywhere and whenever they wanted and how they wanted. On my way home, I saw a place where they were selling bread, a German place, and I stopped to buy bread. And I heard somebody scream, "There's a Jewish woman here, there's a Jewish woman here." And the Germans started to look for the woman. And somebody pulled her out, and she was crying and begging, telling them she's not Jewish. But they took her away anyway. I thought they meant me. When the Nazis walked in September 1939, they were singing songs. Although it was in German, I could understand every word because I just understood because I speak Jewish. They were singing, "We are taking Poland, we will take America, we will take the whole world." and we'll slice open the American Jewish bellies, and we'll take their gold, their silver, and everything else they have, and because it all belongs to us. I can never forget those songs and those words and how they spoke, because I understood every single word. When the ghetto closed, after my father died, my youngest brother got sick, and he died from starvation. 2 sisters were left alive. One was laying in bed, and the other one was sitting next to her. When I came up, I wanted to say hello and sit by the sick girl by her bed, and the other one chased me away. She screamed, "Don't touch her." I noticed that she had lice on her body. Her eyes were closed and they were full of lice. And she died a short time after that. And then the older sister died of the same problem. People were starving and dying in the streets, especially in the winter time. They were falling like flies all over the street and laying dead. And I saw one of the trucks that had the people from this election on the truck. It was not a truck, it was a wagon with 2 horses. And one of those people, one man, tried to escape. And they caught him, and they tied his feet to the wagon, and his body was hanging down, and his head was bumping against the concrete. And there was a long sign of blood from his head. Those things were horrible to watch. One day, I was caught, and my older brother was caught in that selection. I was standing by a wall, and I was praying for hours. All I wanted to do is go home and see my mother one more time, and then I didn't care if I die. And a German Nazi grabbed me by the arm and kept me, but I managed to slide out of his arm, and I ran away, and I ran home. I came home late at night. No one expected me to be alive. My older sister would go out and try to find some food until it was impossible to keep on staying there. And we came out and we went to where the German guards were, and we were sent to Auschwitz. When we came close to the trains, there were a lot of Gestapo men with dogs, German shepherds, and they were just pushing us up on the trains. And we were so crowded that one person stood practically on top of the other. Many people died from starvation, from the heat of being so close to one another. They died standing up. They couldn't fall down. There was no room to fall down. My mother was taken away, and one of my nephews, I had a very large family. Most of them were taken away to the ovens. A short time later, I stood there, and I watched the ashes from the oven where my family went to. And I just couldn't take it. I ran after my mother when they took her, but my older sister grabbed me by the arm, and she said, "Stay here, don't move." And she held me by the arm, she wouldn't let me go. She saved my life. We were laying on the floor like herring or sardines, so close one by the other. One woman just coughed, and she was taken out and put on the table and beaten to death. I will never forget that. How could people do that? No matter who they are or what they are, how can one woman kill another woman with her hands and with other things just because she was Jewish? Those were horrible times. Then we went through many selections. After the selections, we were put in a place where it was only a big electric fence in an empty place. It was a very large place, and we were only women, and a lot of us were very, very young. And we stayed there for 3 days and nights, naked, without any clothes or anything on us, just like we were born. Outside, if it was raining or the wind was blowing or it was very cold, we just stood there like that for 3 days and 3 nights. There were some women that just couldn't take anymore, and they threw themselves on the fence and they started to burn. There was like not ashes, but like a smoke coming from their mouth. And those stories are just horrible to remember and to tell. In 1945, May 8th, the day Hitler capitulated, Czechoslovakian partisans took us out about 12 o'clock noon, and we marched with them to Czechoslovakia. That same night, the German soldiers on their way back from the fighting stopped at that camp, and they meant to kill us all, but we had already left. And the people were very, very nice to us, the Czechoslovakian people. I will never forget them. And the people I know about them that deny that the Holocaust ever happened, they are Nazis, and they deny it, but it is the truth. 6 million people died, most of them in Auschwitz or Birkenau, and a lot of other camps like Treblinka. Those camps were all real death camps, and there's no denial about that. I was there, and I know what was going on, and I know what the Nazis could do and what the Polish people did together with them. And there's no denying it. It was all true and so much more. I only told a very short story of the real story that I could tell.
I think another difficulty talking to the survivors and thinking about the Holocaust is very often we want them to say things that'll make us feel better, to say things that will find a deeper meaning in the Holocaust. But many of us who study it realize that the Holocaust, the Shoah, was about murder. It wasn't about anything more profound. It wasn't about something with a deeper religious meaning. It was outright murder. And thus when we deal with survivors and speak with them and meet them, we have to understand that most of their families were simply outrightly murdered.
I was born in Poland. The Jews of Poland were treated as second-hand citizens. In other words, we had our limitations. But just the same, we were not faced with a a life-threatening situation. In the beginning of 1941, some Jewish refugees from Germany ended up in our area, and from them we learned these unbelievable stories of atrocities that they were exposed to in Germany. And that's when we realized that the stories we heard that we thought perhaps they were exaggerated were not exaggerated at all. This particular couple could not face the Nazis anymore, and they committed suicide. Well, knowing what to expect from the Germans, the question is, what could the Jews of Poland do? So we, my family and I, started to run toward the border on foot, the Russian border. Once we were there, we were told that since we are not citizens of Russia, we will not be allowed to cross into Russia. When we returned to our village, we found that our homes were burned out. About a week later, we were told that all the Jews have to report to a ghetto. We were told that we couldn't take with us except whatever one could carry on his shoulders. No furniture, not even a bicycle. And a family of 2 or 4 or 6 or 10 people was stuffed into a room. And if a house had 4 or 5 rooms, 30 or 40 people sometimes ended up in the same house. I think the worst thing to get used to was the uncertainty of what the next day will bring. Prior to the closing of the ghetto, and of course every Jew had to wear this yellow Star of David on his outer clothing, which was about 5 inches in diameter. Anyone found not wearing the Star of David outside would be simply taken to the woods or shot or hanged, whatever. And unfortunately, that's what happened to my father and my cousin. Now, there is no good way, or good time I should say, of losing a father, but it seems to me this was the worst time for us. And we still had to go on. After the 2 weeks, the children and the elderly disappeared from the ghetto. And of course at that time we just couldn't comprehend that they would be taken away and killed, but that's what it turned out to be, the German plan. This was already in the end of 1941, to get rid of as many Jews as they could, starting with the babies and the elderly, which they considered, of course, non-productive element. Why feed them? Then my brother and I were called on to report to a labor camp. We were sure that we may end up in Ponary, which was about 15 kilometers from the city of Vilna, and it was a killing place. That's where the Germans would take all the Jews from the neighboring smaller ghettos and promising them to take them to the ghetto of Vilna, but they never reached the ghetto. They reached Ponary. They were forced to run toward the mass-prepared graves and get undressed, and they would be machine gun. Several of the youngsters that were ordered to bring the corpses to the graves, one can only imagine what went on under these circumstances. People, when they were exposed to shooting, began to scream, run, and hoping to escape. But of course they were hit and they fell on the ground 50, 100 feet away from the graves. So the youngsters were supposed to drag their corpses and put them in the graves. Now, After the killing, the Germans were simply sitting back, relaxing and boozing. Evidently, even for them, it was not an easy job to do. Now the youngsters realized that they will probably be shot because the Germans didn't want to have any witnesses, and they figured they'll take a chance and try to escape. Since it was a wooded area, many of them during the escape were shot and killed. Half a dozen managed to escape. They reached the ghetto of Vilna, and they told us what was going on in Ponary. Needless to say, we knew by then already that every Jew was sentenced to die. It was just a question of when, how, and where. We walked at night for another 3 or 4 hours to a place which was called Stutthof. Stutthof is a concentration camp. It had a chimney, a gas chamber and crematorium. When I arrived in Stutthof, I have a tattoo on my arm, which is 79,970. That's how many inmates were in Stutthof at that time. One can imagine a slave market where we were lined up in columns of 100, our shirts off, and the Germans would pass by and pick the ones that still had any meat on their body that looked like a better working specimen. The ones left behind had to contend with the fact that the smell of the crematorium of burned human flesh and the smoke from the crematorium chimney was just a reminder that our days are limited. And so we envied the people that were picked to be taken out of Stutthof. However, after a few months, the same people would return to Stutthof in very debilitated condition, like ghosts in slow motion. They would be taken to the gas chamber in order to get rid of a large group of people. We knew that the Germans were retreating, and we knew that the war will come to an end eventually. The question was whether we will be around to face liberation. It was a very hopeless situation because I could see people around me that I talked to 2 days earlier. They were sitting on the ground dead. And then we heard the ground was rumbling, and we knew that these were not German tanks, because somehow we figured the German tanks probably wouldn't be around here. Anyway, these were the British forces that liberated us on the 28th of April 1945. Both my brother and I succumbed to dysentery and typhoid because our systems were not used to the rich canned food that was given, to us. There's an unknown figure of how many survivors died after liberation because of it. The British tried to help as much as they could, obviously, but that was the case. Now, we were separated. I was taken to a temporary hospital, and so was my brother in a different place. When I was well enough to walk around and look for my brother, I just couldn't find him. And I remember walking by and looking into every person's face, trying to find my brother, but I couldn't. when I mentioned to my mother that I really didn't know what happened to my brother, we went to the same hospital in Rothenburg, Germany, and after looking over the various papers, we found that he passed away on May 19, 1945, and was buried in a mass grave with about 4,000 people after liberation, yes. Needless to say, it was a great shock for my mother, but at the same time, we knew that we are probably one of the few families where more than one member survived. And life had to go on. I met my wife Judy in the camp of Bergen-Belsen, and she survived with her mother also. So we arrived on June the 24th, 1949, to the United States. And I would say that we are grateful for the opportunity to go back to a normal life and put the tragedy of the Holocaust on the back burner, because it isn't something one can forget.
In Germany, they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up.